Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I've got what I hope is going to be a great approach video today coming into LaGuardia Airport. Right now I'm at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm going to fly to LaGuardia. I've done that many times, but I'm going to make sure that I'm sitting on the appropriate side of the airplane for the best view. Today at LaGuardia Airport, there's a very high chance that we're going to land on runway 4, so I have strategically chosen a seat on the left-hand side of the airplane. You'll see why. Now, I always do want to point out that sometimes it's not possible for you to be able to change your seat last minute because the plane may be full. I just got lucky in this case. There happened to be some empty seats on the left-hand side of the airplane, so I made a quick switch over. All right, I am getting ready to board that A320 behind me. The map on the seat back gives you a pretty good overview of the route we'll be taking today from Minneapolis to LaGuardia. As we fly over Pennsylvania, we will fly an approach procedure called the Milton 4 Arrival, which will bring us just south of New York City. Then we'll head north directly towards the runway with Manhattan on the left side of the plane. So let's leave the gate area and head on over to runway 17 as instructed by ground control. Our takeoff direction is toward the south, and we'll have to make a left turn to head towards New York City today. On our flight, we actually don't head directly to New York, but rather we fly routes that bring us to the beginning of the arrival procedure, the Milton 4 Arrival. The procedure begins over Keating, Pennsylvania in Clinton County. On our way there, we have a great view of Lake Michigan between Wisconsin and Michigan, and once we make landfall again, we see Grand Rapids, Michigan and the Gerald Ford Airport. Shortly after that, we see the Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport, and within a short period of time, we fly over Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Please prepare the cabin for arrival. Thank you.
Let's fly the Milton 4 Arrival. No matter what runway we land on, we need to follow this route, which takes us over Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Once we get to the eastern portion of New Jersey, that is where the approach controller instructs us to make turns to set up for the approach to the specific runway. The winds right now are coming from 50 degrees or northeast, which calls for an approach to runway 4 today. We receive clearance down to 7,000 feet as we approach the Staten Island area of New York City. We are close to airspace for Newark Airport, but we're being kept above flights bound for Newark, like this airplane, which is going to land at Newark and is below our altitude. You can clearly see how different altitudes of airspace are reserved for different airports here. We're headed to LaGuardia, which is past Newark, so once we're clear of the airspace reserved for Newark, we'll be asked to descend further. In my previous approach video to LaGuardia Airport, we landed on runway 22. Today, we're landing on runway 4, which is the same physical runway as runway 22, but we'll be using it in the opposite direction, northeast. This approach is much more straight in than the runway 22 approach, since we don't have to go past the airport and back around for landing. All aircraft approaching LaGuardia on the Milton 4 Arrival eventually wind up flying near the Verrazano Bridge, and in this case, we'll be just east of the bridge where we can fly straight into runway 4. It's the quickest approach to LaGuardia from the south. Here's a nice view of Newark Airport. We are clear of Newark flights and are cleared down to 3,000 feet by the approach controller. The approach controller has asked us to fly a heading of 80 degrees and to reduce our speed. This heading will bring us out to a point where we can intercept the runway localizer, a signal that follows the center line of the runway all the way out to the ocean. Once we get to this point, we turn on the localizer and head directly towards the runway. We're looking at Staten Island here, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Staten Island is the southernmost borough of New York City. Remember that even though we came from the west, our approach took us to the south, so that's why we're by Staten Island now. Beyond Staten Island is New Jersey. The approach controller has ensured that aircraft from all directions are appropriately spaced to get to the extended center line of runway 4. For arrivals from the south flying northbound up New Jersey, their speed and heading are adjusted to fit in, and for aircraft that are coming from the north, they're asked to fly southbound on the Hudson River, then make a left turn around Manhattan to get into runway 4, while being told to adjust their speed and heading at the same time. It's a complex airspace as the controller works 3 flows of traffic to one place in the sky. For us, on our 80-degree heading and speed of 180 knots, we are appropriately sequenced between all of the other arrivals and are poised to join the extended center line of runway 4, which will be on a heading of 44 degrees, which means that we'll have to turn to the left 36 degrees to line up with the runway. We've been cleared by the controller for the instrument landing system approach to runway 4 and are told to cross green at or above 2,700 feet. Green is a point on the approach course 11.1 miles southwest of LaGuardia Airport. It's the first named location on the instrument landing system, and we will be intercepting the straightened approach course just before green. We are good to go in terms of the approach, and the only other clearance that we will need is landing clearance, but that won't occur until we're closer to the airport. We're continuing along over Staten Island while descending to 2,700 feet and are now heading out over the Atlantic Ocean on our 80-degree heading. We can now see the Verrazano Bridge, and in the distance, we get our first good view of Manhattan Island. We'll lose sight of Manhattan once we make the turn to join the final approach course, but very soon we'll be at the same level of the skyscrapers as we approach runway 4. Just south of the Verrazano Bridge, in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, is Hoffman Island, named for a former mayor of New York City and used as a quarantine station in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's at this point where our pilot turns the aircraft 36 degrees to the left to wind up on a 44-degree heading to point directly toward runway 4. As the aircraft levels its wings, we're provided with some great views of the beaches of Staten Island on the Atlantic Ocean. Neighborhoods like Midland Beach and South Beach can be seen from here. The highway on the right is the Staten Island Expressway, also known as I-278, which leads to the Verrazano Bridge, which we'll see again in a moment. Now that we're all set up and on the straightened approach course, the approach controller advises us to change radio frequencies to the LaGuardia Airport Control Tower located at Terminal B at the airport itself. The borough of Brooklyn is directly in front of us, and we'll be over it in a moment. As we call the control tower, we're informed that the traffic is light, the wind is from the northeast, and we're clear to land on runway 4. We can now proceed inbound with our clearance to land. What a great view of the Verrazano Bridge. The Verrazano, or Verrazano Narrows Bridge, connects Staten Island with Brooklyn and opened to traffic in 1964. The bridge is named after Giovanni da Verrazzano, who explored this area in 1524. We're now over Brooklyn, and Coney Island is off of our right side, but I chose my seat on the left side for the upcoming view of Manhattan. We're approaching green, that point 11.1 miles south of LaGuardia that we need to cross at or above 2,700 feet. Once we pass green, we can descend to another point on the approach called Dennis. Dennis is 6.1 miles southwest of LaGuardia, and we can cross that point at 1,700 feet. As we descend lower, we fly over very dense residential areas. Departures from LaGuardia Airport will always remain clear of this airspace as they climb, and any other traffic such as helicopters that fly at low altitudes are also talking to someone in the control tower who helps to separate the traffic. This is a very, very busy airspace, and we are low to the ground now, but ATC is ensuring that our path is clear. There was one aircraft ahead of us, but it already landed by the time we called the control tower, so we can just continue on with no conflicts. Along the shoreline, we can see the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. Red Hook is actually a small peninsula, and just beyond Red Hook we can see Governor's Island in the harbor. At 172 acres, Governor's Island is part of the borough of Manhattan and has a long history of being a military base. Today, it's now open to the public. It's now time for the highlight of landing on runway 4, the view of Manhattan. The first part of Manhattan that we see is Lower Manhattan and its cluster of skyscrapers, with the most notable and highest being One World Trade Center, the tallest building in the USA and the Western Hemisphere. This building opened in 2014. Connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn is the famous Brooklyn Bridge, which opened in 1883. The Brooklyn side has its own set of skyscrapers, which are located in the downtown Brooklyn neighborhood. Downtown Brooklyn is the third largest central business district in the city. This view is incredible and entirely man-made. As I zoom into Lower Manhattan, you can even see another cluster of skyscrapers in Jersey City across the Hudson River in New Jersey. We're now approaching Dennis. That's the point on the approach I mentioned earlier that we can cross at 1,700 feet. We've descended 1,000 feet since Lower Brooklyn. We can see the Williamsburg Bridge, and we're now passing by the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn as we descend below 1,700 feet. Our landing gear is down, our flaps are set, and we're all configured to land on runway 4. We now have a good view of Midtown Manhattan. Midtown Manhattan is known for its own cluster of skyscrapers. It's got some famous ones like the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, but in recent years, many super tall structures have been built in this area. The skyline has changed so much in just a few short years. LaGuardia Airport is located in the borough of Queens, and in a moment, we're going to leave Brooklyn and enter Queens. The dividing line here between Brooklyn and Queens is Newtown Creek, the creek that you see here. The creek is a branch of the East River and stretches for 3.5 miles inland. Beyond the creek, on the right side of the airplane, the border between Brooklyn and Queens is marked by streets. You can see another cluster of tall buildings in Queens on the East River here. We're now very close to landing and are about to fly over the Long Island Expressway. There's another approach to LaGuardia where aircraft at this point turn right to follow the expressway and circle around to land on runway 31, but we're going to continue straight on into runway 4 today. The departure runway today is runway 13, which is the same runway as runway 31, but in the opposite direction, so runway 31 cannot be used at all. Our very low altitude takes us directly over the Queens neighborhoods of Sunnyside, Sunnyside Heights, Woodside, and Jackson Heights. Planes fly very low over a densely populated area here. I invite you to check out my video called The Spot at LaGuardia Airport with No Construction. In this video, I'm standing near the end of the runway and I film aircraft on final approach that are about to land on runway 4. And as always, I narrate the whole video. When runway 4 is in use for landing, there is no other place like this. This approach brings airplanes hundreds of feet above the homes in the largest city in the USA. It's a real thrill. Directly below the airplane is a small park called LaGuardia Landing Lights Park. Yes, the park is named after the approach lights to runway 4. With just seconds to go, at a very low altitude, we fly over the Grand Central Parkway, and we're now flying over airport property right before touchdown. Runway 4 is 7,001 feet long, and it intersects with another runway, runway 13, that's being used for departures. 7,000 feet is not a lot of runway to stop on compared to other major airports, and today we're going to use most of the runway. Ideally, landing aircraft try to vacate the runway before the intersection of runway 13, so that runway can be used for departures, but today, traffic is light. There's no queue for departures at all, and there's actually no traffic behind us, so we're extending the landing roll through the intersection. This brings us onto a man-made pier built in the 1960s that juts out into Flushing Bay. There's actually water below us, and the pier here is supported by stilts. The pier carries the runway, 2 turnoffs, a parallel taxiway and holding pad. We're vacating the runway on the next to last exit, taxiway uniform, a very short taxiway used for turnoffs. We turn onto taxiway uniform, which allows us to turn onto taxiway Romeo, which will bring us back toward the terminal area. While on the pier, you can see how close LaGuardia is to the water. We're looking at Flushing Bay here. As we continue on taxiway Romeo to get to the gate area, aircraft are often asked to hold short of runway 13 on the way back to allow runway 13 to be used for departing aircraft. However, today, as we just saw a few moments ago, there are no aircraft at all waiting to take off, so we're told to cross runway 13 without having to wait at all. Runway 13 is 7,003 feet long. Once we cross the runway, we'll turn left on the next taxiway, taxiway Papa, and contact ground control. Ground control tells us to proceed straight ahead on taxiway Papa to get to Terminal C today. Taxiway Papa becomes taxiway Bravo, and we'll take that all the way down to the terminal. We're almost completely done with our flight today. As we continue on taxiway Bravo, we see the famous Welcome to New York sign.
Gotta love the approach to runway 4 when you're on the left side of the airplane.
We've been cleared into gate C38 by a ramp controller located on top of the terminal, and at this point, we are no longer controlled by the FAA's air traffic controllers. Ground crews marshal us into the gate, and once we're fully stopped, the gate agent brings the jet bridge into position so all passengers can deplane.
Thank you. As usual, I really enjoyed flying into LaGuardia today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button so that you're alerted as to every time I post something new. And thanks so much for watching. See you next time.